Hello, it's Vanessa with Farmgirl Gardens and Market, and today I am potting up the tomatoes that we started from seed just 2 weeks ago. So now there's no right or wrong way to pot up tomatoes, in my opinion. Some methods do work better than others. I'm just going to show you what works well for me. So tomatoes are one of my favorite plants to grow, not only because of the different varieties that you can grow when you grow from seed, but truly tomatoes are one of the most resilient plants in the garden world. Tomatoes form air roots all along their stems, and when you bury the tomato plant, the more that you bury it, the more that it grows, the more roots that it puts out. So it's just a resilient plant, and I just really love kind of the personality trait of the tomato, in that the harder you try to bury it, the more it's going to grow. So what I look for generally when I pot up tomatoes, and potting up is this process when you are propagating seeds where your little baby seedling has sprouted, but it's not temperature conditions in the outside world yet to put this guy outside. And if we were to leave him in this tiny little pod, he would become root bound and he wouldn't have the root structure that he needs to grow well, especially in Texas. These guys are going to survive the summer and they're going to need all the roots that they can get. Woo! Almost lost our camera. Let me see if I can fix this real quick. Yes, okay. So, sorry about that. So, what I look for is the formation of the secondary leaves. So the first thing that's going to happen when that seedling emerges is it's going to shoot out its primary leaves. And this is a good example on our Jubilee tomatoes. If you see this guy right here in the front, how he just has those two little leaves, those are primary leaves. Do not transplant at this stage because this seedling is still just too fragile. I wait until the secondary leaves form, which are these more tomato-like leaves that you can see. What's so great is they already smell so much like a fresh tomato, so my greenhouse just smells lovely. But I'm looking for those secondary leaves. Now, some people like to wait until the transplant is a little bit hardier, and that's fine to do. The reason that I don't is because the smaller the sprout is when you transplant it, the smaller container you can pot up into. And so if we were to let this guy go, the general rule of thumb on tomatoes is you are burying up to 90% of their height, because if you see on this stem, if you see all those little hair-like structures, see if I can get this to focus. You see those? All those little hair-like structures are air roots right now, but the second we bury them, they will turn into soil roots, and they will create a much larger water and nutrition absorbing capacity for this plant. So I like to transplant them as small as possible so that I can keep them in smaller containers. It'll save you on some soil costs, and also kind of just saves you having to have that much more space, because if I were to stick this into a 4-inch pot, I would run out of space on my greenhouse shelves quicker than putting them in here. And so that's just kind of how I like to do it. It is a little bit early for some, and you do have to be careful, but you know, we can handle it, and so can the tomatoes. So what I do is and you don't need to do this, but I do want to show you. Do you see how these roots have just grown through this seed pod? This seed pod was designed to be buried in the ground, and this will degrade. But it does create just enough of a barrier for this tiny little plant that I like to go ahead and remove it. I do compost it, so all that I do is I just peel it off, and it's almost like a stocking. Just peel it off to release my pod. And then what I do, I refer to this as untangling the necklace. Y'all, if you've ever had a necklace that's been tangled up, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. But I actually kind of like to turn it over and push in my little seed popsicle stick tool just in the center. And that disrupts this root ball just enough that I can now kind of pry apart the different ones. You're just going to kind of wiggle it, right? We want to be gentle. And as they separate, they don't always separate evenly. This one will be good to go as his own little guy. And then this guy, I'm just going to very carefully pull him free. And this is like the necklace part where you're just kind of romancing the root. And so now I have my 3 separate tomato sprouts. And these are the Jubilee tomatoes. So these are these guys right here. What I have found works really well is whatever size container you're going to use, fill it halfway with soil. I've got my big bin of soil right here, and shake the soil or hold your container horizontal so that you can get half of your soil in like that. And then what I like to do is I just take this guy, I'm burying up to 90% of the full height, and I'm going to just lay him on his side. And this approach, I find, is a lot more gentle in the process of transplanting than if you were to just shove a hole in and try and stick the plant in. That would disrupt the roots a lot more. In this manner, I'm laying him gently on the soil, then I'm putting my finger here to kind of hold him in place, right-siding him up, and just shaking this loose soil to kind of go around him. And then what I will do is I will just add more soil over top of him while kind of holding him in place. And then shaking it around again. And so now he's nice and in the center. I will come in and gently tamp around him just because we've disturbed his roots so much. We want to make sure there's really good contact with the soil. So I just go in and use my fingertips to gently tamp him. And then what I do immediately after is, because he is small, so the smaller you are, the more vulnerable you are, you wouldn't want to do this whole process and then water. You really want to work quickly and water as you work. And so now that I have him transplanted, I'm taking my spray bottle of non-chlorinated water, which is important at this stage that it's still non-chlorinated, because again, we're stressing this plant out, so we want to give it the best nutrition possible. I am just watering him in, and then I am adding him to the rest of my little guys that I am working with. So I will continue to pot these guys up and get all of these into their temporary new home. I will likely pot them up at least 2 more times during this period while we wait for the last frost date. We are in zone like 7B to 7A to 7B, depending on where in north central Texas you are. But our last frost date isn't supposed to be until the very end of March. And so these guys, by the time that they are finally ready to go out into the garden, they should be a good 8, maybe even 10 inches tall. So I'm expecting to pot them up at least 2 more times. And starting small allows me to keep the scale small and maximize the amount of burying the plant height without having to increase my substrate volume. So it does help save some money in that sense. But I hope that that has been helpful to you in sharing my methods for how I transplant tomatoes. And I just hope that you are getting excited for your spring and summer gardens. I know that I am. And until next time, bye y'all.